Welcome back, folks. This week we're going to be doing Raphael from the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. This is a model that I've printed in 1/8 scale, and this is from LA Figures. So I'll just do a quick turnaround. I imagine a lot of you people have probably seen this model already. They're pretty popular, the Turtle range. A lot of people have done them. So I'm a bit late to the party, admittedly. But hey, got there in the end. It's a great model. I wanted to make it, so why not make a video? He is all in parts still. Now, I've mentioned this with my last video where I made Trapjaw. I'm very impressed with how they cut the models. They use some kind of witchcraft to make sure that you don't even have to glue them together, but yet somehow or other they still hold into place. So it makes painting obviously a lot easier. I will be disassembling him when I paint him. He has been primed in grey. I just used Halford's basic grey primer, which is pretty decent primer. It's good quality and it's also quite cheap. So if you don't want to sort of pay prices, you kind of end up paying in modelling shops, particularly like for the Citadel range and stuff like that, then yeah, get yourself a can of primer. I think it's like 500ml for like $11.99, so well worth a bargain. Anyway, that's enough about Halford's primer. Let's get on with this model. So what I'm going to do, as I say, is disassemble it. I'm going to start with the biggest area, which is going to be the skin. So my game plan for the skin is eventually what I'm going to do is all four of the turtles. So for that reason, I don't want them to all have the exact same skin colour on each single one. I want a bit of variation between them. So for Raph, I'm going to go with Caliban Green. So I want him to be the darkest out of them all. So I've gone with the darkest green I've got. And I'm just going to throw this all over the skin parts. Hopefully I can get away with one coat, but if not, I'll apply a second. With that base coat down, what I'm going to do now is do some dry brushing. So I'm going to start with Wire Flesh, which is still a very dark green, but it's slightly lighter than what we had down originally. So this is going to be a subtle shift just to bring that colour up a little bit. That is then followed up by a dry brush of Deathworld Forest. Now, it's just like we just did, just carry on concentrating on the raised areas. This model has got a lot of defined muscles, so it makes dry brushing quite easy. Just concentrate on the raised areas, try and avoid the creases. Now, it's going to be subtle, but I'll show you sort of the finished results. So this one is before the dry brushing, and this one is afterwards. And I'll just try and get the camera to focus. Come on, you can do it. There we go. And you can see the bit of depth into the different shades of green. You can see the darkened down lines of the recesses of the muscles. So that's the effect we want to try and achieve. So after all that dry brushing, this is the finished result. Now I could take it up a bit lighter, but as I say, I want to keep this guy as a much darker green skin anyway. So I think for me, I think that's probably about the right colour I was aiming for. Next up, I'm going to move on to the next biggest part of the model, which is the shell. And so for this, I'm going to be using some Steel Legion Drab from Citadel. And I'm going to cover the whole of the back of the shell and also these side parts here and the part underneath. That is then followed up with an all-over shade of Agrax Earthshade. Now, it's just a case of working this into all the recesses, just making sure it doesn't pool anywhere as it dries. And this should help darken down those recesses. After all those recesses are filled in, this is what you're left with. So it's definitely brought out the detail, so it looks much more like a natural turtle shell. So what I'm going to do now is cover that over with a dry brush of Sandry Dust. So this will just start to bring up the highlights. So you can see straight away that lighter tone, just catching the edges. And after all that dry brushing, you can see all the detail of the shell that's now been brought out. So turning the model round, let's do the front part of the shell. This time round I'm going to be using some leather brown by Vallejo. Now, despite the name, it is nothing like the colour of leather in my opinion. It's a very yellowy mustard brown. So it's not really the right colour for leather, but I think it is going to be the right colour for the shell. So it's a fairly thin paint, and I did thin it down a bit more with a bit of water, so it's probably going to take a couple of coats. Next up, I'm going to take some Seraphim Sepia, which is another shade paint by Citadel. So this is kind of a yellowy brown, and I'm just going to go over all that shell that we just painted. Now that wash has dried, we're going to go back to some dry brushing. So I'm going to go with leather brown, which was the original brown we used to start with. So just to bring back up that colour a little bit. And then that is followed up with a second dry brush of Baylor brown. So I'm pretty happy after all that dry brushing, but I want to accentuate some of the cracks in the armour, or in the shell I should say, and also sort of bring a bit of definition around. So what I want to do is take some black wash. I'm just going to essentially take a pointed brush and just run some of this wash into those cracks. So I'm going to run it into the recesses here, and then I'm also going to run it along the outline of the shell, and might also run it around these sections here. Next up, I'm going to be painting the belts and the pouches and the knee and elbow pads. So I'm going to do all of that same colour, and I'm going to do that in Rhinox hide, which is a very dark brown by Citadel. That is then followed up with a dry brush of Mournfang brown, and that's going to go over all of those brown details we just did. Then it is some gunmetal silver next, and that's for all the little poppers on the belts and also the blades of the size. Next up, I'm going to take some Nuln Oil and I'm going to go over all those silver details. Now I'm going to be careful how I apply this. I don't want to slap it on too much, because what I want to try and do, because it's inevitably going to run down into the recesses, but what that'll help do is actually just add in a little bit of a shadow between where the metal meets the hand. And what that'll do is it'll just make the painting slightly easier as well, because it'll eliminate any sort of harsh line or gap where the silver will overrun a little bit. So as I say, just sort of be careful, kind of almost push it into the recesses where you want it to go. Make sure you don't put too much on. With the pouches completed, I've now glued them onto the model. What I'm going to do next is concentrate on the face. So to start with, I'm going to paint in the gums using some Screamer Pink. And this is a nice dark pink. Now, the gums aren't that easy to see, but they are a little bit around the bottom and the top. So, helps if I've got some paint on my brush. So just paint those in just around. Next up, I'm going to use some Bloody Red by Vallejo, and this is going to paint in the mask. Now I think this is quite a thin paint, so it's probably going to take a good couple of coats. So I want a nice strong red. Next up, I want to add a bit of depth to the recesses of the mask. So what I'm going to do is take some Carroburg Crimson, which is a red wash from Citadel, and I'm going to go over the entire mask with this. Being a bit careful when I get round to the edges. You don't want to sort of for it to go everywhere, but just trying to concentrate and make sure that it falls into all the recesses, darkens those down. It's Rapheal flesh next, and this is for all the wraps on the arms and the legs, and also I'm going to do the same colour because there's wraps around the handle of the sai. After applying that Rapheal flesh, I've also put a coat of black wash over all the wraps, and that has darkened down into the recesses. Now you could try brush that back up, but I think I'm going to keep it as is. I think that darkened down tone looks more realistic. So next up, what I'm going to do is take some Ogren Camo, which is a fairly thin paint, but it still needs a touch of water just to thin it down a little bit more. And I'm actually going to paint the nails around the edges on both the hands and onto the feet as well. So all I'm going to do is just do very thin strokes. In fact, let me just get the right amount of paint on my brush. So all I'm going to say is thin strokes along the edge of the nail, just following it around, going all in one direction. Next I'm going to take some black and just paint in all of the eyes, because we're going to come in after that with some white. So this is just to make sure that all the recess is black. With the gums painted in, it's time to do the teeth. Now to do this, I have used a drop of bone white mixed in with a majority of deck tan. So it's just to give me a slight off white, because I don't want the teeth to be sort of pearly white teeth. So that's just a case of working in between the gums, each of those teeth. Following that, I'm going to take some Nuln Oil and I'm going to work it into the recesses of the teeth, just to try and bring out the detail a little bit more. So effectively just go into the lines. Like so. Okay, so next I'm going to take that original red that I used, that Bloody Red by Vallejo, and what I'm going to do is just go back to the mask and just start to layer it back up again. So where that shade darkened it down, I just want to bring it up in the raised areas. So I want to keep the shade in the darker areas, in the recesses, but just bring up the open flat areas. Finally, it's to take some Corax white, and this is to whiten the eyes. Now, because I've painted them in black previously, I don't need to take the paint all the way up to the edge, just need to focus it into the middle. Make sure I've got a nice round eyes for each side. So with the face all done, I've attached the bandana onto the back there, and the figure is done. So I can glue all the parts on him now, and I can now start work on the base. For the base, I'm going to start with some Balthasar gold, and that's going to go across this manhole cover. And just making sure, get nice coverage. I might need a couple of coats. Rhinox hide next, and that is for the soil layer that is underneath the concrete. Next up, it is Zomba Grey from Vallejo, and that's going to go across all the concrete. Then for the stripe that goes across, I'm going to paint that deck tan colour. After all those base colours are applied, I'm going to now throw some washes over the whole thing. And to do this, there's no real science behind it. I'm going to add some blacks, some browns, some greens. So these are kind of the shades that I'm going to take. It's just a case really of throwing it over where it looks best, blending some of them together. So I start throwing over some black wash, for example. Don't need to cover the whole thing. But then what I might do is then mix that up with a bit of green wash. Take a different brush or clean off the one you got. That's just not a very good brush, it's a bit too small, just grab a bigger brush. And yeah, just start working that in alongside it. It's just sort of got different patches of different colours, just to give it a bit more realism. Once you've mixed these colours together, or essentially made sure that all areas are covered, it should all start to blend in and look a bit more natural. After all that washes are applied, we're going to do some dry brushing. So Steel Legion Drab to start with, and that's going to go on the side over the mud layer of the base here. Followed by a dry brush of Menstratum Grey over all the grey parts. Okay, so after that dry brush you can see it's made quite a bit of difference. And you can see that the sort of colouring where the washes have gone in, and there's no two parts that are exactly the same, which is what we wanted. Last thing I'm going to do is a dry brush across the manhole cover. So for that I'm going to use a two-stage process. I'm going to go back in with the original Balthasar Gold and then a dry brush of silver over that. Okay, and I think that should just about do it. So that's now the silver and the Balthasar Gold has now caught up all the edges. Raise them up a little bit, you can see the details a little bit nicer. Looks a little bit more realistic. I'm not going to do anything with the stripe. I think the washes alone was all that needed was there, so I don't think I'm going to do any dry brushing there. So I think we are done. So now time to put this guy together and I'll show you the final reveal. Here we are then, folks. Here is the final reveal. So I'll just spin him around. So you can see all the texture on the skin there that's come out through all that dry brushing, same as the shell. See all the battle damage on the back there. There's some really nice touches to this model. And yeah, I'm pretty happy with it overall. I suppose that the base is quite good. I'm not sure that the sort of mud layer underneath is really needed, but I quite like the sewer top. Definitely adds to the Turtles vibe. So as I say, this is the first turtle character I've done, but I will be doing some others. I think probably go for a villain next in the Turtles line. So not an awful lot to say. Fairly straightforward paint job, this one. A lot of dry brushing, a lot of browns and greens used. So not the most colourful, but I think to go with a quite intense red on the bandana, I think is the way to go, just to add that sort of splash of colour. So I think I'm going to leave it there. Hope you enjoyed this video. Hope you got something out of it. And I will see you in the next one.